up on This American Land.
I know other farmers that have given up farming because of the drought issues.
The world's changing climate means dry conditions are here to stay. Crop switching is one solution farmers are using to adapt.
Here's the Waiuli field. It's super happy and won't need water for another 2 weeks.
And you'll be amazed at what these plants turn into when they grow up. The Mayo Clinic is known for saving lives. Now, it also has a winning prescription for saving energy.
In Minnesota, we have the courage to try out new things.
This city is on the road to a clean energy future.
It's a 4-mile loop that will run through the center of the city.
Most of the time, the traffic is so heavy that animals don't even try to cross.
Interstate 80 is a gateway for humans, but it can be a deadly roadblock for migrating wildlife. We'll show you how biologists and transportation experts are creating new pathways to keep everybody safe.
When we first started seeing the animals come across and seeing the film of the big groups, it was really exciting.
Hop on board. We're all charged up for a new episode of This American Land. Funding for this program provided by the McKnight Foundation, the Walton Family Foundation, and the Horner Family Fund.
Hello and welcome to This American Land. I'm your host, Ed Arnett, and we've got some great stories for you today about the conservation of America's natural resources, its landscapes, waters, and wildlife, and about the people who are dedicated to conservation. In our first story today, let's go to Arizona, in the lower basin of the Colorado River, where climate change is reducing the amount of the river's water needed to irrigate crops. Farmers are looking to switch to crops that need less water than alfalfa, corn, or cotton, and some believe they've already found one that's hardy, less thirsty, and profitable.
Because of no winter rains, we're cut off on water, so we don't know when we'll see water in here again. My name is Nancy Kaywood, and I'm from Casa Grande, Arizona. We're a 5th-generation cotton farm. My family has been farming in this area for 91 years, and we've had drought cycles, but this is the first time we've ever seen a mega drought where it's year after year. This is our alfalfa field. The last time it received water was right around the first part of April, 5 weeks ago. I know other farmers that have given up farming because of the drought issues. The land right across the street has been sold and it will turn into solar energy. The land right here has been sold by those farmers and it was turned into solar energy. You can hear this crunching. It's just starting to dry up. They stuck it out as long as they could, and eventually the money runs out. You can't pay the water and the taxes anymore, so it's not your best interest to try to keep the land. Your best interest is to probably go ahead and sell, and it's heart-wrenching to think that, but it's true.
We're dealing with something that is different than drought. Drought implies that the next big rain is going to solve our issues, and that's not what we're dealing with. I'm Kevin Moran. I work with Environmental Defense Fund in our Ecosystems Water Program in the western United States. Lake Mead is the largest reservoir in the country, and it stores Colorado River water for 3 states and 2 states in Mexico. Because of reduced supplies and climate change, Lake Mead is at the lowest level since it was first filled in 1930s. It means that next year, the farmers in this area will see 2/3 of their surface water go away. Climate scientists are using the term aridification, which means we're dealing with a drier future. It's going to be this way for a long time, and it requires us to adapt and come up with new solutions. Crop switching, looking at lower water use crops like Waiuli, is one of the solutions we need to be looking at. The ability to use half the water that alfalfa uses and still potentially have a viable farm and agricultural economy.
I'm holding a Waiuli plant, typical shrub. It's native from Mexico. We're We're here at the Waiuli Research Farm of Bridgestone Americas, which is outside of Phoenix. The rubber is all contained in the bark area, so all the way from the stems to the roots, there's rubber in it. If I break off a piece of the plant and pull back the bark, some of the resin has rubbed off to my finger. And when combined with other materials, the rubber from this 10-acre field would produce over 500 tires. Our research farm is set up so that we can implement different ways of irrigating that would mimic the way other growers across the state might do it and just be able to do good science. We're in a stress irrigation experiment, and right here on my left, we're looking at a full irrigation treatment. The plant height in this field are about 35 inches tall. They've received 6 irrigations in 1 year after establishment. And then the next plot here is a stress irrigation. After establishment, this plot has only received 1 irrigation. Plants are about 25 inches tall. We see the potential in this crop, so we're looking to have this domestic source of it, something that we could produce here in the Americas, and when it's right, we'll expand.
Most of our rubber now comes from the Far East, and it all comes from one particular type of plant, and if that gets diseased, and as we deal with climate change, it's always good to diversify your crops. So the University of Arizona is working with Bridgestone to get us to a whole new bioeconomy in southern Arizona, which would be Waiuli plants that then are converted into tires.
We call this Project Ike. Dwight David Eisenhower, then a colonel in the United States Army, was part of developing the plan to grow Waiuli. Now, why did they do that? They realized that the supply of rubber in Southeast Asia was at risk if war with Japan came. And so the Army produced Waiuli at a massive scale, and it produced the tires in the tanks and trucks and airplanes that won World War II. That crisis was about supply chain in a war that was cut off. Today, the crisis is climate change and sustainable agriculture in a water-stressed region.
How we decide crops out here is 3 parts. I mean, can we make money? Do we have the land for it? And do we have the water for it? My name's Will Thielander. I'm a 3rd-generation Arizona farmer. So here's the Waiuli crop on the left, and it's interesting because you'll see some plants flowering, some not. So they kind of develop at a different stage a little bit. My dad was nice enough to let me join the family business about 13 years ago. Kind of water we're doing right now when we're flooding, we have to do that about every 2 weeks for the corn and the cotton. The Waiuli, that's about once a month. Current state of the water issues and the growth of Arizona, without things like Waiuli that will use less water, the prospects of future generations being able to do this is not great in Arizona, to be completely honest with you. So here's the Waiuli field, and this crop hasn't been watered for about 2 weeks, but it's super happy and won't need water for another 2 weeks. Yeah, with this crop using half as much water as the corn, our water will last twice as long here. So that's why the crop is so promising. We really hope it takes off.
The conversion to a new crop is not easy, but it's a new day and a drier future looms.
So right now we're in our research lab at the process center, and all our final products we test in here before we ship them out.
And so part of what we're doing with partners is educating farmers, talking about the science of Waiuli production. You need to understand how to plant it and how to cultivate it and how to harvest it. And there needs to be the infrastructure around it to process the crop and send it off to markets where there's demand. And the other part of it is that Government policy can provide the right incentives to allow for the conversion to low water use crops, and that's part of what we're working on at EDF. Crop switching is one of the proven strategies for planning for a drier future and ensuring sustainable agriculture. And as we're looking at Waiuli and understanding its properties and its potential, we think it's part of the solution.
Let's go now to Rochester, Minnesota, home of the renowned Mayo Clinic. Rochester is a community that's well on its way to achieving 100% renewable energy generation by 2030, a model for other urban centers looking to decrease their impact on climate change. We'll see now how Rochester is doing that.
You know, here in the Midwest, we try to find simple solutions to difficult problems. And if we can't, then we innovate.
We stay in the lead of these technologies. In Minnesota, we have the courage to try out new things.
In the last 10 years, we've already had a reduction of one large power plant. We did not study a scenario that had no renewable in it.
I think the willingness to be progressive, for me, it's the right thing to do right now, and it's kind of the right side of history.
The city of Rochester has some ambitious environmental targets set for the city. My name is Kevin Bright. I'm the Energy and Sustainability Director for the Destination Medical Center and the city of Rochester. Mayo Clinic is really a leader in terms of sustainability here in our community. They've started implementing a range of energy conservation measures that have had a profound impact on citywide energy use. And Mayo's progress has been realized on a campus that's almost 100 years old in some cases.
Think about our utility operations. They really take pride in what they serve across the street. My name's Brett Gordon. I'm section head in facilities management here at Mayo Clinic in Rochester. It can be life and death situations. When you've got people in the ORs, our staff, our surgeons, and those patients rely on reliable power to make sure the lights stay on, make sure the equipment stays on, all the monitoring, but also making sure the temperatures are right, the humidity's right. There's a great deal of reliance on energy. So this is our main chiller and turbine hall right here. Franklin Heating Station produces steam, electricity, and chilled water to basically power, heat, and cool all of the facilities on our Rochester Mayo Clinic downtown campus. About 50% of our chillers are electric-driven, and about half of them are steam-driven. I think what makes it unique from a lot of plants around the country is that it's been utilizing combined heat and power technology for almost 100 years now. This plant, compared to your normal electrical power plant, is about twice as efficient. We've been doing it for a long time, but we're always trying to improve. Since 2012, we've really had a concerted effort to reduce our energy footprint. One of the main strategies is called retro-commissioning. It's going back through your existing buildings and making sure they work the way they were designed. Really pushed hard to incorporate LED lighting. We've also done things like duct sealing. We took a baseline year of 2010, what our energy intensity for our existing buildings is, and we set a goal to reduce that by 20% by the year 2020. We met that goal in 2018, so 2 years early. And then in true Mayo Clinic fashion, we right away set a new goal. And that new goal is to be 30% reduction by the year 2025.
I think if the goals weren't ambitious, then everybody would be doing them already. It takes leadership to set ambitious targets. I think the city of Rochester is fortunate that it has a municipal utility that is pretty progressive.
What's great about a municipal utility is you get to have community involvement in it. I think that the community really pushed the envelope on what they expect out of Rochester. One of those step goals in our 2030 plan is a 10-megawatt solar farm that we're going to locate within the city.
Our City of Rochester transit team is starting to think of ways that they can transition from fossil fuels to renewable or electric-fed vehicles.
We stay in the lead of these technologies in introducing our scooters and bike sharing and car sharing. It reduces that dependency on non-renewable energy sources. Our transit system is a very good system in the city of Rochester, and we are growing. And part of that, we are implementing a rapid transit system that will be in our downtown area.
It's a 4-mile loop that will run through the center of the city, and it's meant to move the 35,000 people that work downtown in a reliable, safe, and environmentally friendly manner.
The buses that we are proposing as part of rapid transit will be electric vehicles that can hold up to 120 people. That's 120 cars that probably will not be on the road causing pollution downtown.
It's also exciting to see the sustainable design approaches permeating into the private development markets.
We're here at the Berkman. There are 350 units of hotel and multifamily housing. My name's Chris Osmundson. I'm the Director of Development with Alatus, the development corporation that constructed the Berkman. This building is Silver LEED. LEED certification requires a lot of different things that involve energy consumption. All the facilities in the building are LED fixtures, building materials, recycling materials. We used a tree, it was a large tree that needed to be removed from the site for this decorative purpose. We have a low flow faucet, water, gas consumption, all of those types of things. It's been pretty tremendous achieving the LEED sustainability. But also passing that benefit really on to the resident here. So it allows someone to probably have a 50% reduction in their utility bill. For this to be the largest building in this area that has that certification is really a huge step forward in terms of a renewable strategy, you know, adopting 100% renewable energies by 2030. I just think that's a really big step forward that, frankly, is probably not a majority position, but needs to be.
Now we go to Wyoming, where a busy interstate highway has historically blocked critical migration routes for wildlife like deer, antelope, bears, and mountain lions. But the building of wildlife-friendly highway crossings is reconnecting animals to their habitats, saving their lives, and saving the lives of drivers and passengers on the highway.
Wyoming. This is the stronghold for giant herds of pronghorn that migrate 100 miles. Elk range from the mountains to the deserts. And the mule deer make some of the longest migrations in all of North America. But thousands of animals undertake these amazing journeys only to get stuck along this road. Interstate 80 acts like a 400-mile barrier for migratory wildlife. It's the open road for us, but not for them. To the animals, it's one giant roadblock.
I'm a writer and a filmmaker, and I work with the Wyoming biologists that track big game migrations.
In 2012,
they used GPS to document the longest mule deer migration corridor in the United States,
up to 150 miles from the Hoback Basin to the Red Desert. But at the southern end of this corridor, the biologists noticed that thousands of mule deer abruptly stopped their migration at Interstate 80. The road also interrupts elk and pronghorn movements, cutting off access to habitat.
If we could help wildlife get across Interstate 80, how much better would it be for the animals and for people? Right now, it's mid-October, and this is the time of year when animals are moving down from the mountains and coming into this desert, where they'll group up along Interstate 80. To survive in this harsh landscape of mountains and plains, they need to migrate, sometimes hundreds of miles, to avoid snow or to find forage.
There's a whole history of why this area is really important to people and animals. Southern Wyoming really ties this country together. It's a desert gap surrounded by higher mountains, a low point on the Continental Divide. This geography is the main reason why big game animals and Native American hunters have moved through this area for thousands of years. About 200 years ago, fur trappers came through Shoshone land. Then the Army came, the railroad in 1868, and the Lincoln Highway in 1913. This route was the obvious place to build the interstate. In 1970, the last section of Interstate 80 in Wyoming was completed. The road now sees about 13,000 vehicles a day. That's about one every 9 seconds.
Unfortunately, the east-west migration of people blockaded the unseen north-south migration of wildlife.
It was unintentional, but we disrupted the connectivity of the habitat. I'm here with biologist Hank Henry, who did a lot of mule deer research in this area back in the 1970s.
We documented over 1,000 were coming across this stretch of road there at Dana Ridge. We were averaging, 50 to 60 deer deaths per year, and the highway was a lot of times iced over, and cars couldn't stop, so it wasn't pretty. The Wyoming Game and Fish Department, before the highway was even built, recommended tunnels that were 10 foot by 10 foot and 100 yards long. The deer were reluctant to use those, so an exclusion fence 8 feet high was put in along both sides of the highway. However, they went around the end of the fence, and that was a big problem right there. But they eventually started using the tunnels, passing through. The machinery underpass, that's the one that most of all the deer were migrating through. And then they could look up to see the sky. It was a real quick through and out. And the whole 400-mile stretch of the highway in Wyoming, they're some of the only structures that exist. If you're gonna keep the deer off the road, you gotta allow them a solution to migrate.
Since the late 70s, when Hank Henry did this work, there's been a renaissance in wildlife tracking and mapping. Researchers have now documented many more migrations north and south, and many day-to-day movements, nearly all of which come to the interstate and stop. Through decades of data, animals show us that I-80 is a massive barricade. It adds unnecessary challenges to their survival, ultimately making herds less resilient. Most of the time, the traffic is so heavy that animals don't even try to cross. Up to 6 lanes of travel, as well as the railroad tracks, make a nearly impassable barrier for wildlife. That means they can't move to the right habitat at the right times, which is their most important adaptation. To hear about that, I visited Mark Zorns, the wildlife coordinator with the Wyoming Game and Fish Department in Green River.
So pronghorn are avoiding that snow by drifting in a direction where the conditions are better. Towards Flaming Gorge Reservoir, there's less harsh conditions, but unfortunately, in this case, they hit Interstate 80.
Mark told me about an event in 2017 that was a nightmare version of what Hank Henry saw 40 years ago.
So it was a bad winter. We had semi-truck eastbound that was traveling too fast for conditions. The gentleman hit about 25 pronghorn and killed all of those animals. And believe me, those are really bad days to be a wildlife biologist.
So what are some of the solutions that would work for crossing on Interstate 80?
Pronghorn do not like using our deer underpasses. They don't like using little tunnels. They want to be able to see. They want it to be open and expansive.
The good news is that Wyoming has already found solutions that work remarkably well.
We decided to build all these grade-separated crossings to make it safer. 6 underpasses, 2 overpasses, and about 12 miles of the tall fence. When we first started seeing the animals come across and seeing the film of the big groups, it was really exciting. In the first 3 years, there were 60,000 safe wildlife crossings. We reduced mule deer collisions by about 79%, and pronghorn collisions dropped to 0. It was every bit as much about connectivity as it was about the money. The Trappers Point project was about $9.7 million, but we think it would pay for itself over the first 10 years because each animal vehicle collision cost about $11,000 in property damage, and then every deer that didn't get hit was worth about $3,000 to the state. We learned a lot of things from this project. We needed to manage both daily movements and migration kind of issues. You really need all the tools in the toolbox, the fence, the overpasses, the underpasses to address the issues that you have. And then what's really going to help us on future projects, and especially on I-80, is those relationships that we've developed with the biologists and the NGOs.
Successful projects involve combined efforts of the public, Wyoming Department of Transportation, Wyoming Game and Fish, and federal agencies, and also the private landowners that have stewarded migration corridors for generations. But Interstate 80 remains the single biggest barrier and the hardest to fix. But here in Wyoming, crossings could benefit tens of thousands of animals and reconnect some of the longest migrations that are left in the United States.
And now, here's a quick look at stories from our next show.
This is what the 850-mile migration route looks like.
The amazing journey of Chinook salmon from the Pacific Ocean to the central Idaho wilderness. But if they are to survive, some dams will need to go.
We have made possible the river coming back.
And after decades of decline, a new future for the Colorado River.
That's all for now, and thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on This American Land.
For more information about this program, visit thisamericanland.org, listen to our podcasts, and like us on Facebook. Funding for this program provided by the McKnight Foundation, the Walton Family Foundation, and the Horner Family Fund.